So it's the 3rd of December today, and I'm going to harvest my oca. In fact, I'm just doing the standard weekly harvest today. And I do get a lot of questions about oca. I think it's quite an unusual vegetable to grow, and I find it's quite useful. Now, the way that we use oca is we use it as a radish alternative actually in winter. It tastes quite, it's got a similar sort of crunchy texture to radish. It's about the same sort of size as radish. It's got a little bit of zest to it, a bit like radish, although it's more sort of lemony than spicy. And some people cook with it, but we really like it, and we think it's brilliant over winter. So it's winter now, so we're going to start harvesting it, and we'll be harvesting it now every week through till March, when we'll have radish again. So it's a great little crop. Now, you can also cook with it, and you could think of it in that case more as a potato alternative. Maybe you would think of it a bit like your Christmas potatoes. You don't get a huge yield from Christmas potatoes, you don't get a huge yield from oca, but you can grow it in a similar way. So let me just step you through quickly the various different sort of stages of growth, and I will link to my full guide with more videos and all that sort of thing in the description.
Okay, so let me just break into this video for a second. So to find the growing guide, you want to go into my ebook linked in the description and individual growing guides, and just scroll down until you get to oca. By the way, oca is also known as the New Zealand yam. And so here's my guide. Now, it's pretty comprehensive. It's got everything that I know about growing oca. And I have linked some articles at the end that go into more of the kind of background to the crop and how it's grown in other countries and things like that. I'm just focusing here on how to grow it here in the UK. But there's all the information in here: how to plant it, harvest it, feed it, store it, all of that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, we grow it pretty successfully. It's a very useful little crop to us. So take a look at this if you want more, and there's quite a few extra videos and things linked in this guide. And as I say, there's the useful articles you can find at the end there.
So let's start off with planting and where you get your tubers from. Well, I use tubers from previous years, so I save the ones that are about maybe an inch long, something like that. You don't need really huge ones. Basically, I want ones that will fit in an egg box because that's where I keep them. So I pop them in a frost-free, so I take tubers from my last harvest or thereabouts in March or late February, and clean those up, and I just pop them then in egg boxes. And I keep those egg boxes in a frost-free space until sort of middle of April, probably something like that, early April. And by then when you look at them, you'll see that they're starting to probably dry up a little bit. And you might even see tiny little shoots starting to form on the tuber. So it's a bit like a chitting of a potato. What I do then is I just take a 6-cell module tray, and I fill it with compost. I pop the oca tuber in there, about an inch down under the surface, and lightly moisten the compost. And then I'll just keep it slightly moist in a frost-free, relatively warm place. It doesn't really need to be that warm. This is just what I do. So I've generally put it in my conservatory, which is pretty cool at that time of year, on a rack, and just wait until it breaks surface. So what I do then is I just keep it in a sunnier location, keep it watered until the last frost has reliably passed. And so then I've got trays of little tiny plants. They're probably about this sort of size. Hopefully I'll get little clips of videos showing you what they look like. And then I plant them in a 25-litre tub, and I plant 1 tuber per tub. They do grow into pretty big plants. And how do I prepare that tub? Well, I take my homemade compost and I just add a little bit of extra bloodfish and bone. So probably about a handful of bloodfish and bone. Not confident that that's the right amount or that is the best fertiliser. It's just what I do. You can judge based on the results, because I'll show you a harvest in a minute. And so, and what do I do then? Right, so just keep it watered basically. Now you can use the leaves in salads. They are really lemony, so you don't want very many of them. Just like 4 or 5 leaves to a salad really adds a little bit of zesty freshness to the salad. Just don't pick too many, obviously, because you want lots of leaves to get lots of tube growth. And you want to keep making sure that your container is not shrinking from the sides. I often find that does happen to me, and so I'm fill it up, make sure I'm filling up the sides with new compost, because I think homemade compost particularly shrinks quite a lot. So every few months basically I fill it up, and I will about sort of September time I will also earth it up, because the compost will have shrunk down, and I find you get a lot of tubers forming in that top sort of extra 2 inches that you add when you earth it up. So I say about September time is when I do that, and hopefully I'll have a little video clip showing that as well. And then when you don't want to really harvest it until well after the first frost. So as soon as you get the first frost, you get a bit of dieback. It's probably going to be a light frost, bit of dieback on the leaves, leave it. Wait for another couple of hard frosts, not too hard though, because you don't want to damage the tubers. So maybe -1, 2, maybe -3, something like that. Tubers should be okay. And all the foliage will die back and go kind of like into a soggy, horrible mess. So what I do as that's happening is I kind of pile up all of the foliage onto the top of the container, and that kind of protects the tubers from any frost damage. Also keeps the mice out. I find that mice really love ochre, although it does kill them, I think, if they eat too much of it. I have found a few dead mice around my ochre ochre tubs over the years. And then once that foliage is really sort of died down, what's happening is that those tubers are absorbing the nutrients from the stems of the plant and swelling, and you get a lot of tuber growth during that period of time. So you're going to lose out on a lot of harvest if you harvest them a lot earlier than that. So that is pretty much the process. Turn the tub out, harvest the tubers, give them a good clean, and then you've got an option. So I just like to eat them fresh as they are then, but you can't eat a huge number of them because they are quite high in oxalic acid, and that's where the zestiness comes from. Some people leave them on a windowsill, sunny windowsill, and that can reduce the amount of oxalic acid in the tubers. The problem with that is that it's probably fine if you're cooking with them, but I find that they're just not quite as crispy when you do that after 2 or 3 days in the sun. So maybe there's a better technique for that I don't know about. If you know about it, then let me know in the description below. And that's pretty much it. We eat them within a week, and then we harvest another tub week after week. So they are a great little crop. That's everything I can think about off the top of my head. Let's take a look at the harvest for today. So there we go. Now I would consider that a good ochre harvest. There are a few slug damaged tubers, but there's very few of those. Just like probably 3 or 4. And actually what you find is you can actually just cut the bad bits off these. They're that good. I probably wouldn't bother with that one, but yeah. So that's pretty good. I'm pleased with that, and that is more than enough for us for a week. So I'm quite happy with that. One thing I did forget to mention though is I did say that mice love the tubers. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to move the tubers into my polytunnel, and then I can kind of protect them with a bit of fleece if it gets really cold, because you don't want them to freeze. And when I'm actually starting my tubers, as I said, I start mine in the conservatory, But when I bring them into the polytunnel in May, I have had the mice actually climb up onto the trestle tables in the polytunnel and burrow into the compost and take the tubers out. They seem to be pretty hungry at that time of year, or they just love ochre. So what I do now is I actually put them up in the roof of the polytunnel, kind of on a board, and they don't mind lots of sun and warmth, so they're quite happy up there, and the mice can't get them. So you do have to be a bit careful. I will bring some mice traps as well into the polytunnel. So yeah, mice are quite an issue with ochre if you've got a mouse problem. We don't particularly have a big mouse problem, but we don't want a big mouse problem either, so we don't want to be attracting them in and getting famous as a location for, you know, winter snacks. So there we go. I've just filled all the gaps in the polytunnel. These will all be full of new potatoes pretty soon, but for now that's what they look like. And I have actually got there, look, one of the red ones, and you can see, hopefully, even though it's covered in soil, just how beautiful it is. And there you go, just by way of contrast, the last radish harvest and the first ochre harvest. So yeah, I can't really keep radish good quality now and bring them to maturity at this time of year. That's how the ochre cleaned up, and this sort of size is fine for storing and for next year's tubers. Although, as I said, I don't really store mine, I just harvest them fresh from the compost as I need them. So that is probably more than enough actually for a week for us as part of our weekly harvest, which looks actually pretty good for winter. So hope you like this quick video. My name's Steve. Do take a look at the guide below. Do provide comments and additional feedback and things like that. There's other ways of growing them, of course. You can grow them in the ground. I just find that I get a better yield in tubs, and I've got space for tubs, and I've got spare tubs, and I've got spare homemade compost. So it makes sense for me. What I do with the compost though, once I've finished with it, is I just put it back into the compost heap and add new greens to it, and then I'll use it again next year. Not necessarily for ochre, you know, just as general, you know, it's back into my general compost mix. I do that pretty much with all of my containers. I always just recycle the compost back into the compost bin, or just use it to mulch the beds directly, but I kind of prefer to regenerate it by adding new greens to it, and yeah, just recomposting. See you soon.